In this video, I'm going to show you how I make a big batch of fluffy sourdough waffles using a technique of an overnight sourdough sponge with discard. And these are delicious. They feed my family of 6 and they also freeze really well. Hi, I'm Jenny from Living Bread Baker, and if you love sourdough videos and content like this, I love to create easy recipes and also teach you about sourdough starter and sourdough fermentation. So subscribe if you want to see more of this, and let's get into how I make these waffles. So the first thing that you'll need to make these waffles is some sourdough discard on hand. I have a few videos that I'm going to link down below about what sourdough discard is and how I store it. So what I do is when I make sourdough during the week, I always have some leftover that's not going into a recipe and that ends up becoming discard because it only stays in that active stage for so long. So I usually just collect it in a jar. Sometimes I might have even up to 2 jars full of discard in my fridge, and I leave it there until I use it in a discard recipe. So by the end of the week, I usually have plenty on hand that I will make into this sponge. What a sponge is it is a mixture of usually flour and water. Sometimes it might be flour and milk, and a lot of times it has a starter agent, so it might have some leavening from a commercial yeast, or in my case, I'm using sourdough starter. And it's going to sit usually for a long period of time. Mine sits overnight. By morning, we don't need to use any more flour. All of that flour and moisture is already there, and so we just add the other ingredients. Another reason why I love using an overnight sponge is some people worry about food safety when they're using eggs and long fermentation with sourdough. Well, with the sponge, there are no eggs added until morning time, right before you're getting ready to actually make the waffles. So it's a very safe method, and it also makes a really big batch without using up a bunch of milk or other ingredients. Overnight, that sponge is able to develop a lot of flavor, and it has a much fluffier texture. When you first mix it, that flour and water usually is really sticky and thick, but by morning time it has tons of bubbles and aeration, so it already has a lighter texture when you start to make your batter. The night before, in a large bowl, I mix 600 grams of water, 200 grams of sourdough discard, and 500 grams of flour. Personally, I love to use half whole wheat flour and half all-purpose flour. By using some whole wheat flour, it gives it a little more flavor, a little more fiber. The texture difference is that with the whole wheat, you're gonna have they'll be a little bit softer, a little more porous, whereas all-purpose, they'll be much thicker and more crunchy. So depending on whether you want some more fiber, some more bran, or which texture you like better, you can use 500 grams of all-purpose completely, or half whole wheat and half all-purpose to create 500 grams total of flour. So we'll mix that until there's no more dry flour, and then cover that with plastic wrap or a shower cap, or I just use a large plate over my mixing bowl. And then in the morning, you'll see a completely different appearance in the batter. So while that's resting still, it's time to get our other ingredients together. And the first thing that I do is I melt my 6 tablespoons of butter on a skillet. While your butter is melting, get your area ready for your waffle making. You can use a Belgian waffle maker or a traditional waffle maker. Each one is great. Get those preheating while you're making the rest of your batter. Once I melt the butter, I let it sit and cool. You can cool it faster if you move it to a different container like a bowl or a glass carafe. Once my butter is melted and set aside, I'm going to add the other ingredients to my sourdough waffle sponge. So I add my baking soda, salt. I also like to add some vanilla for some more flavor and sweetness. I add my cinnamon to taste. If you don't like cinnamon, you can skip it. Once the salt and baking soda and cinnamon are in there, I give it a mix, and then I like to add my sweetener. So for the sweetener, the easiest thing to add is 4 tablespoons of brown sugar. But if you don't have brown sugar, you can also use maple syrup. You can use applesauce for your sweetener as well. Or you can even leave it out if you prefer to have them a little bit less sweet. Now for the eggs. I am using 2 eggs in this recipe. If you want really fluffy waffles, an extra step that you can do is actually separate the eggs. Put the egg whites in a separate bowl and whip those until they're fluffy and have soft to stiff peaks. And then the egg yolks you'll mix into regular batter, because those egg whites that are all fluffy and white, we're gonna add those at the very, very end. But don't worry, this recipe still turns out great if you choose not to separate the eggs and just add them whole into the batter. So give all those ingredients a mix, and then as you're mixing, if you're not using a stand mixer, You can have someone else slowly mix your dough, and you're gonna gradually add your melted butter. I've also used melted coconut oil in a pinch, and that works well. But either way, you are going to want to add it slowly because it is warmer. If it's added too quickly, if it's too hot, it's going to actually cook the batter, which we don't want. So add it very slowly. Once the butter has all been added and is well incorporated, if you have done the extra step of fluffing your egg whites, use a spatula for this part and just fold those in until they're mixed in, and you'll see the batter becomes a lot more fluffy and light. I love my waffle makers. The first one, the large one, is a double waffle iron, and it flips. It is awesome. It makes 2 waffles at a time, which is really helpful if you are baking waffles for a big group or you have a big family. You're going to be done a lot faster. This is a Belgian style one, which I love. There are the more traditional style waffle models, but yeah, if you are cooking for a lot of people, I highly recommend getting one of those. The smaller waffle iron that I'm using is from Dash. They have a lot of different designs for different holidays. This is a gingerbread man one. But one thing I love about these small waffles, while I don't like to make all my waffles small like this because it is a little more tedious to make one tiny waffle and each one takes about 2 minutes, these are really great for freezing. The big ones will freeze just as well, but I do love the small ones because they're easy to put in the toaster for my kids and pull out. But both varieties will freeze really well and be great go-to quick breakfast options. So once you've made your batter, then you're going to add it to your waffle maker. How much batter you add will depend on what kind of waffle maker you're using. I'm using a large scoop. It's about a 1/4 cup measure. I usually do 2 scoops for the large Belgian waffles and 1 scoop for small waffles. Personal preference, because I'm cooking for a lot of kids and sometimes my ones are younger, will want a whole waffle and they usually can't finish a whole entire waffle. I usually make my waffles a little bit smaller. That's just my personal preference. This recipe is great for adding blueberries, adding chocolate chips, adding diced fruit to your waffle maker. Sometimes I'll just put the batter in there and add that straight to the batter while it's on the waffle iron. So have fun making this recipe. If you want to freeze them, my recommendation is use a gallon freezer bag. If you have some left over, sometimes we don't have any left over, but if we do, we store them in a gallon freezer bag with a small piece of parchment between each waffle so they're easier to take out and they don't freeze together. Just make sure they're completely cooled down before you put them in the bag and before you put them into your freezer. To reheat or defrost from the freezer, you put them into your toaster, usually about a level 3 or 3.5, depending on your toaster model, on defrost. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you're excited to make these. We make these just about every single weekend. They are so delicious, they're easy to make, and I love that it makes a really big batch. So please share this with a friend, and I hope that I get to see you next time on one of these videos. Leave me a comment to let me know if you've tried my method or if you have any questions, and I would love to help you connect with your family more through bread, especially through fun recipes like sourdough waffles.